We had the head of the Iranian National Security Council warning the Arab states that what Iran is doing is against American bases in your countries. And because Iran doesn't recognize these bases as your country, they're part of the United States. That's why Iran is attacking them. If do you have this sort of feeling that the Saudi Arabia or UAE may join the conflict?
It's not impossible, but obviously Iran has every right to strike all of these countries because it's not just US bases. They have assets in different parts of the country and in the city. The CIA has its offices, the US military has its offices, um, Trump has his and Witkoff and others have their own interests. They are the enemy. So the enemy is bombing Iran. They're using these countries. They're all complicit, every single one of them. You can't have your cake and eat it too. You cannot say I'm neutral, but allow your territory to be used against your neighbor. That's not acceptable. So Iran is going to deal with that, and it is dealing with that. But have no doubt, if the UAE moves against Iran, that will be the end of the UAE. Saudi Arabia is in no position to fight Iran. I mean, what could Saudi Arabia contribute or add to what the US is already doing? But Iran, if it strikes Saudi Arabia, it is very vulnerable. It's a desert with oil. You know how the West likes to call Russia a gas station. That if one country is going to be called that, even though it's not completely accurate, that would be Saudi Arabia. Saudi Arabia is completely dependent on oil, on its oil exports, and therefore it is completely vulnerable. So if they don't want Iran to strike, then they should expel all of those Epstein forces. All Epstein forces, if they leave Saudi Arabia or they leave the Emirates, then it's over. There's no problem. But they're waging war against Iran, using their territory, using their air bases in Saudi Arabia in particular. They're using the air bases in the Emirates. They have all sorts of facilities, intelligence gathering and monitoring facilities outside of the military bases. That's not acceptable. That's being a part of a war against the country. So we'll see what happens with Saudi Arabia and the Emirates. But if they make a foolish move, they will give Iran the right to deal with them very differently from what they're doing now.
I forgot to ask you, many people or in our audience don't know what is happening in Iran in the absence of the supreme leader of Iran. Who's leading the country in the absence of the supreme leader of Iran?
Nima, you know this, and I'm boring you, but Iran's constitution is very sophisticated. And the West likes to depict all non-Western entities as unsophisticated. They're supposedly sophisticated. The Iranian constitution is very sophisticated, and it has worked very well for the last 47 years. After the demise of Imam Khomeini in 1989, after the war, the next day we had Ayatollah Khamenei as the leader, chosen by the Council of Experts, which is a chosen body, an elected body that chooses and can also remove a leader. We had the assassination of the president, the prime minister, together back then. That was a big deal. Back then, the constitution was a bit different. We had a prime minister. They were both assassinated together. We had new elections. We've gone through multiple crises because the West has always been out to get us. Why? Because we've been independent, because we've been pro-Palestine, because we've been pro-liberation movements across the world, Southern Africa, Latin America, and so on. We've been working against empire. So from the 1980s, early 1980s, Iran was supporting the resistance in Lebanon to expel the Israelis. So we've been because the Israelis had occupied Lebanon. They captured the capital in 1982. So we've been through many crises. The Constitution is very clear. When the leader, when we lose the leader, whether he passes away or is martyred, as in the case of Ayatollah Khamenei, you have a council, a representative from the Guardian Council, and which is different from the Council of Experts, the president and the head of the judiciary. They are a council, and until a leader is chosen, who chooses the leader? The Council of Experts, the elected body of high-ranking, um, what do you call it? Experts on Islamic law,
Yeah.
jurisprudence, right? High-ranking jurisprudence, like lawyers, in a way. So, for the time being, this council will run affairs, and then when the new leader is chosen, that leader will take over and have the same authority as Ayatollah Khamenei did. I think we will have continuity. The next leader will pursue policies similar to Ayatollah Khamenei. The president, contrary to what some people I see them say online, he's very close to the leader, the head of the judiciary, and the representative of the Guardian Council. They're all close to the leader. So I think we're going to see continuity until the new leader comes, and then we're going to have continuity still. So I'm not concerned about the future. I'm optimistic about the future. And I think, ironically, Ayatollah Khamenei's martyrdom is going to strengthen Iran and the resistance, because it has angered Iranians. And it has angered people outside of Iran's borders. Look at what's happening in Iraq, for example,
In Pakistan.
and Pakistan. But this is a force that the Americans will have to deal with in the coming days and weeks across West Asia at a time of war. And it has made ordinary Iranians even more steadfast than before. Throughout Tehran, there have been mourning ceremonies in different parts of Tehran, just spontaneous, from like 4 in the morning, 5 in the morning. People just going out themselves in large crowds. And a lot of people were out late last night in support of the state, but they didn't even know he was martyred at that time. So people were up till morning, and then from early morning, they were on the streets. This is the mood. Now, the West would like to say that, to dwell on those who dislike the Islamic Revolution and the resistance and who are supportive of Israel's Israeli regime or the United States, but this is a small minority. You see them on campus, you see them in different places. They are very insignificant, and now they've grown less after the war, when some of these people who thought that, they're naive kids, Nima. They're kids. They watch like Western media, and they think like, yes, like they want to bring freedom and so on. And then the first thing that happens is that they slaughter, what was it, 150, 65 kids at a school in Minab, little girls at an elementary school. Do you see them making it a big deal out of it in the Western media? And then almost, I think, almost 20 girls at a gym, at a gymnasium, who are practicing volleyball. I know these Epstein people have a thing with girls. So they massacred them. And people see this. People see what they've done to these little girls, how they've slaughtered them, and how they have no shame and no regrets or no apologies, nothing. And Western media ignores them, but instead pretends that thousands of, I don't know, peaceful protesters are just being gunned down on the streets, at a time when there was no internet and they couldn't even have known what was going on in Iran. They were making those fake accusations. Here, it's clear as day what happened, but they ignore it. So people, even those who were influenced by the West, they are not everyone. You're going to have people who will just keep their eyes closed, just like these Salafis who are hostile towards Iran no matter what. And even when Trump says, "I've installed a Shara," they still say, "No, no, he's good." No matter what evidence you provide them that this was a CIA plot all along to help the Israeli regime, these people, because they're so deeply sectarian and irrational, or just like some of these leftists who in Europe who've always been hostile towards Iran. They would join anti-protest movements to stop the war against Saddam Hussein, which I was a part of that anti-war movement, and Iran also was opposed. Sayyid Hassan Nasrallah was also opposed to the war. He spoke about it openly. Everyone spoke about it. And I was a part of the movement. But these leftists, European leftists, they would go to anti-war movements, but in the case of Syria, since it's somehow linked to Iran, they would be supportive of the CIA. So there's some people, whether they're these Takfiri or Salafi, groups, or the Western leftists, or these Iranian liberals, who will just close their eyes, no matter what. They'll never, they never want to see reality. You just have to move on. It's a waste of time arguing with them. But people after his martyrdom have become more steadfast, and I think this was a major miscalculation.
Mm.
He got what he wanted, I have no doubt, and he said that many times before. But it strengthened the resolve of the Iranian people. It created greater support for the axis of resistance beyond Iran's borders, as well as inside Iran. So I see this as a failure for the West.
Professor, what is the strategy right now on the part of the army in Iran, IRGC, together with the army? The Strait of Hormuz is just closed. And we've seen that many footages are coming out of Israel. Iran is hitting Israel the way that they haven't been hit before. What is the strategy? Is that focusing on the Strait of Hormuz and Israel, or they're gonna hit Americans as well?
Well, Nima, I, I, and you and I have discussed these things for many months, and your other guests have also discussed these things. And but you see how Western media and Western analysts are surprised at Iran's resilience and how Iran is striking back, and in the Persian Gulf especially. While they shouldn't be surprised. We've been discussing this for a very long time. No one who watches your show would be surprised that Iran is striking uh, targets in U.S. targets or assets in the Persian Gulf region. Nor should we be surprised that they've closed the Strait of Hormuz. So it just shows the degree of ignorance among Western Iran analysts in the West, and analysts in the West in general, and their politicians and their leaders in general, that they are surprised, whereas nothing that is happening right now should surprise you or me. And it doesn't, obviously. I think that Iran is doing the same thing that it did during the 12-Day War. I don't know what the future holds, and I don't know what the plans are, obviously. But I think that Iran is slowly building up the pressure. It is slowly making it more difficult. So you saw a ship in the Strait of Hormuz hit today, and another ship, I think, was right before we were on began. I think another ship was struck, and then you have the targeting of, especially in the Emirates. The focus is on the Emirates. Why? Because the Emirates is the closest to the Israeli regime, and the Israelis and Americans have lots of assets there. Mossad and the CIA, the military, and so on. And also, as we discussed before, Iran's missile capabilities are extraordinary. And Iran doesn't have 2,000 missiles. I think that's what the Israelis said or something, or Netanyahu. I don't remember the number. Iran's, uh, the amount of missiles that Iran has that can strike Israel are much higher. And so Iran is gradually increasing the number of missiles. They've begun with old drones. If you looked, I'm not 100% sure, but I'm 95% sure that the radar installation that was struck in the Persian Gulf, it was struck with old drones. And a lot of the facilities struck were struck with old drones, and the Americans couldn't stop them, which says a lot about their air defenses. The air defenses in the Persian Gulf were no good. But Iran has been using old drones and old missiles. A few newer missiles here and there. But basically, the missiles that were first generation are being used. And they're getting through. But they're also depleting the Israeli regime and the Americans of air defenses. So you see the same pattern as last time. Only this time around, Iran is facing a much more, a bigger enemy, because the United States is much more powerful than the Israeli regime. And the Israeli regime's power is US power. Without the US support, it would collapse in weeks. So I think that Iran is building up the pressure in the Persian Gulf. And we'll have to see what happens when the markets open uh, on Monday morning. Uh, it begins in East Asia and Australia and so on. But we'll have to see what happens on Monday and what happens to the price of oil and gas and so on. But the Iranians are gradually increasing the pressure. The Iranians don't want to create a global crisis. They don't want to destroy the global economy. Iran didn't want the war in the first place. None of us want war. But if they impose it upon you, you fight. And Iran does not want to bring down the global economy. Iran does not have that viciousness that the Epstein class has. Iran has no viciousness. Iran wants the global economy to function. But Iran is going to increasingly put pressure on the United States. And the more pressure there is, the more the international community will put pressure on the United States, and the more Americans will put pressure on the Trump regime. And already, I think there is pressure increasing in the United States. I'm not saying it's going to get anywhere, but what Iran wants to do is build up the pressure, and time is on Iran's side, because logistically, it's very difficult for the United States, if not almost impossible, for it to sustain this war for very long. But this is Iran's home turf. And remember, Iran has regional allies. And another thing we support the axis of resistance for ideological reasons, because they are the oppressed. When the Americans occupied Iraq, of course we're going to support the Iraqi people. And the same is true in Afghanistan, and so on. But also those who are, now when Iran is being confronted with an enemy, those same allies are saying we will support Iran. And so these liberals in Iran who've always been saying, why are we supporting these entities outside Iran? Now they see that even if you look at it just from a pragmatic perspective and not from a moral and ideological perspective, it makes sense. For us, it is both. For us, without morality, life is nothing. That's what makes us so different. That's what makes this the axis of resistance versus the Epstein axis. Because for us, morality is, our politics has to have morality. Our existence has to have morality, both at an individual level, at a community level, and at a social level. So the Iranians have allies across the region. And therefore, they can build up the pressure, their allies, the Iranians, on multiple fronts. And for them, it's also existential, because they know that if Iran is, God forbid, defeated, they will all be defeated. And have no doubt, if there's failure in Iran, it is going to be very bad news for China and Russia. So these policies that I see, although it's less than a day and a half, and I shouldn't overgeneralize, but I think it's not dissimilar to what we saw during the 12-day war, only it's moving forward at a more swift pace. Because at that time, the Iranian response was slow. This time it was very swift and very steady and on multiple fronts. It's not just the Israeli regime, but the Persian Gulf. Not just in the Persian Gulf and the Strait of Hormuz, but the other side of the Persian Gulf. So this is one country that's managing war on multiple fronts against a very, very powerful enemy. I find that very extraordinary. And of course, that is the brilliance of Ayatollah Khamenei. But again, we don't know what's going to happen in the days ahead. There will be ups and downs. There will be pain and hurt. War is a terrible thing. And the United States and the Israelis will, they bombed Tehran today quite severely. The Iranian Air Force, by the way, today carried out major airstrikes in the Persian Gulf region, very impressive. And the Americans could not block it, nor could the Israeli regime. But in any case, war is war. But I think that Iran is managing things well, and they're going to gradually tighten the screw on Trump. And hopefully, the pressure in the United States will build up so that this war will come to an end sooner rather than later. But Iran will fight for as long as it takes to impose a strategic defeat on the United States and the Israeli regime, or I should say on the Trump regime and the Netanyahu regime, or the Epstein regimes, however you like to call it. They will impose this defeat on them, God willing.
We've learned from the Iranian foreign minister that Iran doesn't need anybody to help him and isn't asking anybody to help Iran at this particular moment. But do you see any sort of scenario under which Iran would ask, the allies in the region to help him to be more decisive against the United States?
I think they're already becoming more involved at their own initiative. But if the tensions build up and Iran is forced to deal more harshly in the Persian Gulf region and with the Israeli regime, the Americans and the Israelis may increase, well, the Americans may increase pressure to whatever point they can. And therefore, Iran's regional allies at that point, for example, let me just go back to Saudi Arabia. If the Saudis do anything foolish, then there's Yemen. So already pressure is building in Iraq and in Yemen, but it could go much further than this. All of them, I think, are in a sort of loose coordination. They're turning the screws on all fronts slowly. But most of Iran's capabilities, Nima, are hidden. Overwhelmingly, Iran's missile bases have not been touched. They've not been used. Iran only uses a certain number of their bases, just like in the previous war. So they're planning for a long term, and but they could also start using those bases now, so they can, escalate rapidly. They can escalate slowly. But at the moment, I think the escalation is gradual. Unless the United States does something stupid, or the Emiratis or the Saudis or the Israelis do something really stupid, then the Iranians would escalate very rapidly. And that's when I think the global economy will just suddenly collapse.
We had Starmer, the Prime Minister of United Kingdom, threatening Iran that they're going to join, the fight. And to Iran, when it comes to the United Kingdom, who's the United Kingdom in the whole calculation in the West Asia? How does Iran see the United Kingdom?
Nothing. The United Kingdom is a collapsing regime. Starmer has no credibility at home. He's deeply despised. His party is very unpopular. and he already has more than enough on his hands in the Ukraine. And he, of course, has been helping the Israelis carry out the genocide by carrying out intelligence flights over Gaza during the last 2 or so years. So he's quite a monster. But there's nothing that he could add to what the United States is already doing. And it's already very difficult for the United States to continue this fight. It's very expensive because they have to keep their assets very far away.
Yeah.
And so they have to fly and they have to refuel, and on the way back, they have to refuel again. So it's not as if like when the Iranians carried out airstrikes against US targets in the Persian Gulf this morning. They flew, they struck, they came back. But that's not um, how it works for the Americans or the Israeli regime. So it's much more costly. You have to carry out more, each sortie has less impact, and the planes need overhaul, they need repairs. I mean, I'm not an expert on these things, but it's this is not sustainable. And of course, logistics is a nightmare. They have to keep bringing things from the United States. They've already spent many billions of dollars without the firing of missiles and so on, just bringing all those assets here and maintaining them. So um, the UK can't do anything in particular, nor can the Saudis or the Emiratis. In fact, the Saudis and the Emiratis, they would be shooting themselves in the feet if they got involved.